Think of a time when nothing in the home went to waste. Every peel, every shell, and every scrap had a second life in the garden. Your grandma leaned on tricks that turned scraps into fertilizers, weeds into protectors, and waste into abundance. These tricks weren't flashy, but they worked, tested across decades, and handed down quietly through families. Let's explore 40 vintage gardening hacks Grandma wouldn't tell you. Copper penny in pots. Your grandparents often slipped a copper penny beneath the soil of potted plants. Copper, released slowly into the damp soil, acted as a mild fungicide, keeping mold from forming around roots. It also discouraged slugs and snails, which disliked crawling near copper surfaces. In flowers, pennies helped cut down damping-off disease, a common issue where seedlings rotted at the base. The metal didn't dissolve quickly, so a single coin could stay useful for years. Some families lined the base of terracotta pots with a few pennies before adding soil, ensuring both drainage and the subtle benefit of copper over time. Pennies from before the 1980s contained more real copper, making them especially effective. Even orchard keepers sometimes tied strips of copper around young tree trunks to ward off fungal infections, extending the principle beyond pots into the field. Start seedlings in eggshells. Eggshell halves were kept through winter, rinsed and dried until spring planting arrived. Each shell was filled with soil and a seed tucked inside, creating a natural starter pot. The shells sat neatly in cartons on windowsills, providing perfect drainage through their porous structure. When transplant time came, the shell was cracked slightly and set whole into the ground, where it decomposed, adding calcium directly to the soil. This strengthened young roots, prevented disorders like blossom end rot, and reduced waste from disposable containers. The method also made transplanting smoother, since roots were disturbed far less than when pulled from trays. Families who kept chickens often had dozens of shells available, making this a near constant supply of free seed pots. Honey rooting method. When propagating cuttings, some gardeners dip the freshly trimmed ends into honey before planting. Honey's natural antibacterial qualities reduced rot, while its sugars provided a mild energy boost for root formation. Grapes, currants, and roses often showed higher success rates when treated this way. The sticky coating also sealed the cutting, preventing moisture loss until roots developed. Families who kept bees prized this method since honey was always on hand. It made use of a resource already valued in the home, transforming ordinary cuttings into strong, rooted plants with a simple dip. Grow cuttings in a potato. To encourage strong root development, slips of roses, currants, or other cuttings were often inserted into raw potatoes before planting them in soil. The potato provided a moist, nutrient-rich medium that protected the cutting as it established roots. This method reduced the risk of drying out, especially in arid regions or during hot spells. The potato slowly broke down underground, releasing starch and minerals into the soil around the cutting. Many gardeners reported higher success rates with this practice compared to simply sticking branches into bare soil. It was a simple, clever way to turn kitchen scraps into living root starters. Water plants with boiled egg water. When eggs were boiled for meals, the leftover water was never wasted. Once cooled, it was poured directly onto garden beds or potted plants. The water, infused with trace minerals and calcium from the shells, acted as a natural tonic for growth. Tender seedlings responded with stronger stems, and fruiting crops produced more consistent blooms. Families often kept a jug by the stove, saving egg water through the week to pour into the soil on market days. Plants that demanded calcium, like tomatoes and peppers, showed fewer signs of blossom end rot when treated this way. It required no special effort, only remembering to save what most households would throw down the sink. Even flower beds gained richer color and sturdier blossoms from the practice. Leftover tea as fertilizer. Your grandma rarely poured out the dregs of a teapot. The cooled tea, rich in tannins and small amounts of nitrogen, was carried outside to feed garden beds. Potted ferns, azaleas, and hydrangeas especially thrived on tea's mild acidity. Some families scattered used tea leaves around the base of roses where they slowly decomposed, adding organic matter to the soil while improving water retention. In hot summers, tea water refreshed beds with both moisture and nutrients in a single pour. Leaves mixed into compost heaps encouraged earthworms, which flocked to the moist clumps and worked them into richer humus. Stronger brews were diluted to avoid leaf scorch, but even diluted, the practice kept soil healthier than plain water alone. Hair for pest control. Human hair swept from combs and barber shops was saved in bags and spread across the garden. The scent kept deer and rabbits away, warning them of human presence. Hair also worked into the soil slowly, releasing nitrogen as it decomposed. Some families tied tufts of hair to fences, letting the wind carry the smell further. Others buried clumps near young fruit trees, where the fibers broke down over weeks, feeding the roots. The fine strands also tangled around small burrowing pests like voles, discouraging them from tunneling into beds. It was a cheap and constant resource, renewed each time heads were trimmed, and provided a double service as deterrent and fertilizer. Broken terracotta pots as markers. Shards of cracked pots were never discarded. They were repurposed as plant markers, their rough surfaces easy to write on with charcoal or soft pencil. The pieces were stuck into the soil beside rows of seeds or transplanted seedlings, showing the crop name without rotting like wood or smearing like paper. Larger shards were leaned at angles to shield tender seedlings from harsh sunlight, creating miniature shades. Some gardeners placed curved pieces over drainage holes in larger pots, preventing soil from washing out while still allowing water to pass through. In every case, the broken pottery gave years of use long after its days as a vessel were done. Manure tea. Buckets were filled with manure and water, left to steep into a dark liquid known as manure tea. Once strained, this solution was poured around the base of vegetables, giving a quick and balanced dose of nutrients. Tomatoes, cabbages, and corn responded with bursts of green growth. Families often covered their steeping buckets with cloth to keep flies away while the mixture fermented. The liquid acted faster than compost, reaching roots almost immediately. Stronger batches were diluted before use to avoid scorching plants. This method was especially prized during midsummer when crops needed a quick lift to finish strong. The practice turned animal waste into a potent liquid feed with little effort. Companion planting. Your grandparents arranged crops not by appearance but by partnership. Beans climbed corn stalks, while squash spread broad leaves below to shade weeds and preserve moisture. Carrots and onions were interplanted, each plant's scent hiding the other from root flies. Basil thrived alongside tomatoes, repelling hornworms while improving flavor. Nasturtiums were sown nearby to draw aphids away, sparing beans and cabbages from infestations. Families kept careful notes, recording which pairings improved yields and which should never meet. This practice reduced pests, increased pollination, and maximized small plots of land without additional fertilizer or sprays. The knowledge was refined through generations of trial and error. Mix tiny seeds with cornmeal. Seeds too small to handle easily, such as carrots or lettuce, were mixed with dry cornmeal before planting. The pale meal made the seeds visible and easier to scatter evenly along rows. It also prevented clumping, ensuring better spacing and less thinning later. As the cornmeal broke down in the soil, it added a trace of organic matter without harming seedlings. Some families used sand or fine ashes for the same purpose, but cornmeal was preferred for its ease and availability. This simple trick made sowing delicate crops far less wasteful, stretching limited seed supplies further each season. Clean tools with vinegar. Garden tools dulled quickly with rust and sap, but vinegar restored them. Metal blades were soaked overnight in jars or buckets of vinegar, which dissolved rust and left the surface clean. A scrub with coarse cloth finished the job. Handles rubbed with vinegar repelled mold and mildew, extending their life. Even clay pots covered in white mineral deposits were dipped and scrubbed clean with vinegar water. This household acid saved families from buying replacements and kept tools sharp and sanitary for planting and harvest. Vinegar was cheap, always near at hand, and gave new life to equipment that might otherwise be discarded. Grow what you love. Gardens were planned not just for yield, but for what the family enjoyed most. Old gardeners focused space on the vegetables that filled plates daily, planting more of them instead of scattering effort across crops nobody favored. Families that relied on beans grew long rows of them, while others devoted beds to potatoes or corn that stored well through winter. Special fruits like melons or strawberries were included if children requested them, making the work feel more rewarding. This approach reduced waste, since food grown was food eaten, and ensured the garden directly supported the household diet. The harvest went straight from ground to table with nothing unused. Sow densely, then transplant. Instead of scattering seeds thinly across large beds, families often sowed them thick in small nursery patches. When the seedlings grew sturdy enough, they were carefully lifted and transplanted into wider rows or separate plots. This saved space early in the season and allowed gardeners to focus water and care on one compact area. Weak seedlings could be culled, leaving only the strongest for transplanting. It also gave a head start in controlled soil before the plants faced harsher conditions in the main field. Crops like cabbages, onions, and lettuces were commonly started this way, stretching seed supplies while ensuring uniform growth. Deadhead flowers for more blooms. Flowering plants were regularly trimmed of their fading blossoms, a task called deadheading. By cutting off spent blooms, the plant was prevented from diverting energy into seed production. Instead, strength went back into producing new buds. Families with marigolds, zinnias, and roses practiced this method to keep color in the garden for longer periods. The trimmed flowers were gathered for compost or dried for later use in teas or decorations. This practice not only made beds more attractive, but also encouraged healthier, bushier plants. A steady supply of blooms brought more pollinators into the vegetable rows, supporting fruiting crops as well. Urine rabbit repellent. Gardeners often saved urine, diluting it with water and sprinkling it along the edges of fields or beds. The strong scent signaled predators to rabbits and deer, deterring them from entering. In some areas, farmers used predator urine bought from trappers, such as fox or coyote, to reinforce the effect. Others relied on human urine collected from chamber pots. Applied carefully to the ground rather than directly on plants, it served as both a deterrent and a mild nitrogen boost. The boundary needed reapplication after rain, but it cost nothing and protected tender seedlings from being eaten overnight. Protect fruits with straw. Straw was spread under strawberries, melons, and squash to keep the fruits off bare soil. This layer prevented rot caused by damp earth and protected produce from slugs and crawling insects. The straw also reduced weed growth around the plants, saving time and maintenance. As the season ended, the straw was gathered into compost piles or left to break down directly in the bed, improving soil texture. In orchards, straw was sometimes spread under apple trees to cushion fruit that fell early, preventing bruising. By keeping fruit dry, clean, and safe from pests, straw made each harvest more reliable. Mow grass when dry. Grass was always cut on dry days, never wet. Damp clippings clumped together, clogging scythes or sickles and leaving uneven stubble behind. Dry clippings scattered more evenly and could be raked easily into piles for animal bedding or mulch. Stored dry, they didn't mold, making them safe to feed to livestock later. Families who cut hay knew the same rule, waiting until morning dew burned off before starting their work. The drier the cut, the longer the stored grass kept without spoiling. This timing saved tools from rust and preserved every clipping for use in field or barn. Water plants at night in summer. During hot summers, families watered crops in the evening after the sun dropped low. The cooler air reduced evaporation, allowing water to soak deep into the soil overnight. Roots stayed moist for longer, and plants endured the following day's heat without wilting. Watering at dusk also avoided scalding leaves, which sometimes happened when droplets acted like lenses in direct sun. Families often paired this method with mulching, keeping the soil cool and damp for even longer. The combination of timing and protection meant far less water was needed to keep gardens alive in harsh heat. Consider drip irrigation. Before hoses were common, families created simple drip systems using clay jars or pierced wooden pipes. Buried jars were filled with water that slowly seeped into the soil, feeding roots steadily. Later, when rubber tubing became available, holes were punched along its length to create a controlled drip line. This method delivered water exactly where it was needed, conserving supplies during dry spells. Disease spread was reduced because foliage stayed dry and weeds were less likely to sprout since paths remained untouched. The steady, targeted supply produced healthier crops with less waste of time and water. Ice cubes for slow watering. In hot weather, some gardeners placed ice cubes directly at the base of delicate potted plants. As the cubes melted slowly, the soil absorbed the moisture without being washed out by heavy watering. This method was especially helpful for orchids, ferns, and other plants that disliked sudden flooding. Ice offered a gradual soak that mimicked natural rainfall in miniature. Families with limited water supplies also used frozen blocks to cool the soil around seedlings during heat waves, extending survival. Though simple, it was a controlled way to water sensitive plants with precision. Insulate pots with wool socks. Worn wool socks found new purpose in gardens. They were slipped over clay pots to act as insulating sleeves, protecting roots from sudden temperature swings. In summer, the wool held moisture and slowed evaporation. In winter, it provided a thin but effective barrier against frost. Some families stuffed scraps of wool between pots in storage to shield them from cracking in the cold. As the socks weathered, they eventually broke down into fibers that enriched compost heaps. This frugal method kept plants safer through seasonal extremes without buying special materials. Wood ash for soil. Ash from wood stoves and fireplaces was kept in barrels for garden use. A light sprinkling across vegetable beds enriched the soil with potassium and trace minerals. Root crops like carrots and beets responded with stronger growth, and fruiting plants developed firmer produce. The ash also raised soil pH, countering acidity in heavy or sour ground. Families spread it around the base of brassicas such as cabbage and broccoli, crops that preferred sweeter soil. In damp seasons, ash doubled as a deterrent to slugs, its dry texture creating a barrier they avoided. Too much could burn plants, so it was applied carefully, a thin dusting rather than heavy piles. With steady use, ash improved soil texture and provided nutrients that otherwise came only from costly fertilizers. Onion skins as fertilizer. Papery onion skins were saved and steeped in boiling water, creating a nutrient-rich liquid once cooled. This infusion was poured onto beds to strengthen stems and encourage flowering. Some families buried the skins directly in rows, where they released potassium and phosphorus as they decomposed. Onion skins also acted as a mild pest deterrent, their sharp scent confusing insects searching for tender seedlings. Roses, tomatoes, and peppers especially benefited from the extra boost, producing larger blossoms and fruit. Since onion skins piled up constantly in kitchens, they became a steady source of fertilizer at no cost. The practice kept waste out of bins and returned nutrients directly to the soil. Coffee filters in pots. Before filling containers with soil, old gardeners placed paper coffee filters at the base. These filters kept soil from washing out through drainage holes while still allowing water to pass freely. They also slowed compaction, letting roots breathe longer in confined pots. Families reused stained filters from the kitchen, doubling their purpose before discarding them to compost. This trick extended the life of potted herbs and flowers by preventing nutrient-rich soil from leaching away too quickly during watering. It also kept porches and windowsills cleaner since no soil dripped out with excess water. Aerate soil with chopsticks. Simple tools like chopsticks were used to loosen compacted soil in containers and seedling trays. By poking evenly spaced holes, gardeners allowed air and water to penetrate deeper without disturbing the roots. This practice reduced root rot, improved drainage, and encouraged stronger growth in potted plants. Families also used chopsticks to gently tease apart seedlings when transplanting, preventing damage to delicate stems. In crowded beds, chopsticks marked spacing between small seeds without the need for string lines. Cheap, precise, and readily available, they extended beyond the dinner table into a regular place in the garden. Matchsticks in soil. Spent matchsticks were pushed into garden soil to provide small amounts of magnesium, potassium, and phosphorus. These minerals leached slowly into the ground as the sticks decayed. Families placed several around tomato and pepper plants, crops that demanded high nutrition to bear well. Matches also helped repel some pests, their sulfur content leaving behind traces that insects avoided. While not a full fertilizer, they supplemented the soil steadily, especially when combined with compost or manure. This method gave new purpose to everyday items that would otherwise be thrown away, stretching resources while enriching the harvest. Bathroom humidity boost. Rooms with frequent steam, such as bathrooms, became natural greenhouses for potted plants. The moisture from daily baths and laundry created a humid environment that kept leaves glossy and prevented wilting. Ferns, orchids, and other tropical species thrived when placed on shelves or windowsills in these damp spaces. Old gardeners recognized that even a small washroom could double as a plant room during dry winters when indoor air was harsh. The constant humidity reduced the need for misting, and warm conditions helped plants survive periods when outdoor gardens lay dormant. It was a low-effort way to extend the life of delicate varieties in homes without special equipment. Lemon peels as biodegradable pots. Hollowed lemon halves were repurposed as small planting cups for seeds and delicate seedlings. Their natural acidity discouraged mold, while the peel itself slowly decomposed once buried, enriching the soil with trace nutrients. These cups were sturdy enough to hold soil for several weeks before transplanting time. Families often set them in rows of wooden trays, carrying entire batches of citrus cups to the garden when planting began. The peel broke apart underground, feeding the plant directly and leaving no waste behind. Using what kitchens provided kept costs down and added fertility back to the soil. Cinnamon for seedlings. Ground cinnamon was dusted lightly over the soil surface around tender seedlings. Its natural antifungal properties prevented damping off disease, a common killer of young plants in damp soil. The spice also repelled ants and gnats, which avoided areas where it was applied. Families saved cinnamon for their seed trays in early spring when fragile sprouts were most at risk. Unlike chemical treatments, cinnamon carried no risk to food crops and broke down harmlessly into the soil. Its dual role as both a seasoning in the kitchen and a protective powder in the garden made it valuable in households that stretched every resource. Baking soda for soil. Baking soda was used to adjust soil conditions and protect crops. A dusting around plants helped deter fungal growth, especially powdery mildew on cucumbers, squash, and grapevines. Mixed with water into a spray, it created a mild alkaline film on leaves that discouraged pests and diseases. Families also sprinkled soda over garden paths to suppress weeds as it altered surface pH enough to slow unwanted growth. Grapes treated with soda sprays often produced cleaner fruit clusters with fewer blemishes. Kept in nearly every kitchen, baking soda was a cheap, accessible solution that improved garden health year after year. Clay pot refrigerator. Unglazed clay pots were used as natural refrigerators. Vegetables were placed inside a large clay jar buried halfway in the ground, then covered with a damp cloth or smaller pot. As water evaporated through the porous surface, the temperature inside dropped, keeping produce cool for days. Carrots, cucumbers, and greens stored this way lasted longer in summer heat without spoiling. In some regions, 2 nested pots were used, with sand packed between them and kept moist for better cooling. This low-cost system preserved food before refrigeration was common, relying only on evaporation and shade. Plant herbs near entryways. Doorways and garden paths were often lined with herbs such as thyme, rosemary, and basil. Their scents released when brushed against, keeping insects at bay and perfuming the air. Families valued their convenience, since cooks could step outside and pick fresh sprigs without walking far. Some herbs, like mint and lavender, also discouraged pests from lingering near homes, creating a natural barrier against flies and moths. In warm evenings, the fragrance rising from these borders gave comfort while still serving a practical purpose. By keeping herbs close, families blended beauty, utility, and protection in one simple practice. Soak seeds in chamomile tea. Before planting, small seeds were soaked in cooled chamomile tea. The mild antiseptic properties reduced the chance of fungal infections during germination. This soaking softened hard seed coats, helping sprouts emerge more quickly and evenly. Old gardeners often prepared a teapot especially for this purpose, letting the liquid cool overnight before use. Beans, peas, and brassicas benefited most, showing stronger early growth when treated this way. The method required no special equipment, only a handful of dried blossoms or a tea bag, yet it gave seedlings a better chance of survival in cool, damp soil conditions. Chili pest spray. Chilies from the garden or kitchen scraps were boiled into a strong infusion with water and a little soap. Once cooled and strained, the liquid was sprayed onto leaves where beetles, aphids, and caterpillars caused damage. The heat from the peppers irritated insect mouths, driving them away without harming the plants. Spraying was repeated after rains to maintain effectiveness. Some families also used pepper spray around the edges of storage bins to keep rodents from chewing sacks of grain. It was a cheap, renewable form of defense that avoided reliance on purchased chemicals. Tuna can rain gauge. A simple tuna can set out in the garden became an accurate rain gauge. Its shallow, uniform sides allowed families to measure weekly rainfall by checking water depth with a ruler. 1 inch in the can meant 1 inch on the soil, letting gardeners know whether more watering was needed. This method prevented overwatering, saving labor, and conserving supplies in dry times. Several cans placed in different areas also revealed uneven rainfall across larger plots. Because tuna cans were easy to find and replace, they served as a reliable tool year after year without cost. Save and dry seeds. Seed saving was a household responsibility as important as tending the crop itself. Families selected the healthiest plants, allowing them to mature fully before harvesting seed. Corn cobs were hung in barns, beans dried in their pods, and tomatoes left to ferment in jars before the seeds were cleaned and spread on cloths to dry. Once thoroughly dry, seeds were stored in envelopes, glass jars, or clay pots sealed with wax. Each packet carried the variety name and year, often written in pencil to resist fading. A cool pantry or cellar shelf kept them viable for years. By choosing seed from the strongest plants each season, families slowly adapted their crops to the local soil and climate. Compost kitchen scraps. Nothing from the kitchen was wasted. Potato peelings, cabbage leaves, coffee grounds, and eggshells were gathered daily into buckets and carried to the compost heap. The pile was built in layers, damp scraps covered with dry straw or leaves to keep balance. Soil or ash was sprinkled between to control odor and speed decomposition. Left to heat, the mound steamed in cool weather, a sign the microbes were at work. In months, it transformed into black, crumbly compost ready for spreading across vegetable beds. Families turned the pile with forks when it cooled, ensuring air reached the center. The result was rich soil amendment that reduced the need for purchased fertilizers. Every meal contributed to the next season's harvest. Plant by moon phases. Gardening calendars often marked not just dates, but moon cycles. Old gardeners sowed leafy greens in the waxing moon when rising sap was believed to favor above-ground crops. Root vegetables such as carrots and potatoes were planted during the waning moon when energies pulled downward. Families swore that seeds planted by these cycles sprouted faster and grew stronger. The practice tied gardening work to the rhythms of nature, aligning harvest times with celestial patterns. Even if debated, it structured planting schedules and gave farmers a steady rhythm to follow season after season. Repurpose old milk jugs. Plastic milk jugs were cut and shaped into versatile tools for the garden. Halved jugs became scoops for compost, soil, or chicken feed. With the bottoms removed, they were set over young seedlings as miniature cloches, shielding them from wind and frost. Holes punched in caps turned jugs into watering cans, delivering a gentle stream ideal for tender plants. Some families cut narrow strips from the sides, using them as durable plant markers that lasted through rain and sun. Filled with water and painted black, jugs also served as heat sinks, warming small greenhouse spaces at night. Lightweight and abundant, milk jugs extended their usefulness long after they left the kitchen. Which of these hacks do you think deserve a comeback today? Let us know in the comments below. See you in the next one.